Greetings. On behalf of the Baha'i Community of London, Ontario, I extend a warm welcome as we gather to celebrate International Women's Day. Today's celebration consists of two parts. In the first, we will have the benefit of three presentations by speakers in the fields of medicine, art and education, and the performing arts and film, followed by a roundtable discussion. The second half of the celebration will afford us an opportunity to view a screening of the film Glimpses into the Spirit of Gender Equality. But before we turn to our presenters, I would like to start by asking our audience, and especially the men, to think about the significance of this day. Why do we commemorate International Women's Day? In the so-called Western world, women are fully emancipated, aren't they? Women in Canada fought for and gained the right to vote between 1916 and 1940. And ever since World War II, women have entered the labor force in increasing numbers and have come to occupy leadership positions in the political, social, and economic life of the nation. During a conversation with a group of mainly older men, one asserted that women have even become more equal. Women have become even more equal than men now. And to prove his point, he knew many women who earned a larger paycheck than some men do. If these facts and this man are correct, why are we celebrating International Women's Day? To put it succinctly, these achievements were never end goals, indications that we had somehow made it, but rather signposts in the journey towards a fuller kind of emancipation not yet achieved. And to be more to the point, we have a long way to go. Consider the following statistics that illustrate the gap in gender pay equity in Canada. 75 cents on average is earned by full-time working women in Canada for every dollar that men make. The gap is even wider for women who are Indigenous, living with disability, racialized women, and newcomers. I do not highlight these numbers to advocate for a more humane or egalitarian form of capitalism, rather to demonstrate how these structural inequalities contribute to women's precarity. The Canadian Women's Foundation notes that gender pay gap contributes to women's poverty, health concerns, and barriers to leaving abusive relationships. In response to the United Nations call for femicide observatories all over the world, the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability noted the following dire statistics out of Canada. In 2019, a total of 118 women and girls were killed by violence in Canada. On average, every 3 days, one woman or girl is killed in this country. Women and girls continue to be in the greatest dangers in their own homes, and more than half, 55%, being killed in their home or the home they shared with an accused. These statistics on their own tell us why the commemoration of International Women's Day and its underlying objective to celebrate women's achievements and to accelerate gender parity continues to be of the utmost importance. For quite some time, men have argued and defended the inequality of outcome as between men and women as products of the natural order of things, that women are the weaker gender and that this is the product of some divine decree. However, in this day and age, men are not afforded the religious basis upon which to perpetuate such arguments. In 1912, in the city of New York, when discussing the rights of women and her equality with men, Abdul Baha argued as follows. It has been objected by some that women is not equally capable with men and that she is deficient by creation. This is pure imagination. The difference in capacity between men and women is due entirely to opportunity and education. Heretofore, women has been denied the right and privilege of equal development. If equal opportunity be granted to her, there is no doubt she would be the peer of man. History will evidence this. In the past ages, noted women have arisen in the affairs of nations and surpassed men in their accomplishments. But let us go a little bit further. You may be familiar with the writings that read as follows. The world of humanity is possessed of two wings, the male and the female. So long as these wings are not equivalent in strength, the bird will not fly. Until womankind reaches the same degree as man, until she enjoys the same arena of activity, extraordinary attainment for humanity will not be realized. Humanity cannot wing its way to heights of real attainment. However, you may not be as familiar with Abdul Baha's elaboration of this metaphor when he once asked a group of listeners, "What will you say if I prove to you that women is the stronger wing?" Abdul Baha proceeded from this saying, "The woman is indeed of the greater importance to the race. She has the greater burden and the greater work. Look at the vegetable and the animal worlds. The palm which carries the fruit is the tree most prized by the date grower. For a long journey, the mare has the longest wind. For her greater strength and fierceness, the lioness is more feared by the hunter than the lion. The woman has the greater moral courage than man. She also has special gifts which enable her to govern in moments of danger and crisis. If necessary, she can become a warrior." Now let us turn to our esteemed panelists to discuss the significance of this day in further detail. I will start by introducing our speakers in order of presentation, and we will follow with a roundtable discussion afterwards. Dr. Sepide Tahere is an assistant professor at Western University, director of the clinical teaching unit at Children's Hospital, and associate scientist at Children's Health Research Institute, London, Ontario. Dr. Taher was formerly consultant pediatrician and honorary senior clinical lecturer at Edinburgh University. Her interests include global health and the advancement of women, about which she has lectured widely in many countries. She is a mother of 2 girls. Ms. Abira Atiq is a renowned international artist holding a master's degree in fine arts. She's a passionate international baccalaureate educator and administrator with a stellar 18 years of international teaching experience. She has worked across the Middle East with renowned educational institutions and is currently teaching at London International Academy. Ms. Abira has traveled extensively around the globe as an artist, book illustrator, and an art educator. Throughout her career, Ms. Abira has been an active member of professional development conferences across the globe. She has been a featured speaker at European Council of International Schools, Northeast South Asia, the Arabian Reading Association, and Teachers of Young Children. Furthermore, Ms. Abir has illustrated more than 27 educational books and is a practicing artist with numerous groups and solo exhibitions held worldwide. As a Muslim artist, she is committed to promoting the misconceptions of the suppression of women's rights in Islam. You may follow her at www.abiraatik.com and on her Instagram page at abiraatik. Catherine Chapman Wong's lived experience compels her to be interested in education and about what moves children away from prejudice and closer to unity. She is the child of an interfaith, intercultural couple, the product of growing up in different countries and different languages, faiths, and cultures, the parent of ethnically mixed children who were raised in 3 countries and as a Baha'i. When her children were born, she became drawn to what the diverse learning environments could teach her about how to educate her children to grow into engaged, ethical, compassionate world citizens, guided by a sense of service. Over the years, Catherine's interest in education has been expressed in different ways in her personal, community, and creative life, including most recently, facilitating conversations about prejudice and unity, and creating the theater pieces born in a call, minutes, and It's the Little Things, and the documentary Me, the Other. And with that, we can turn it over to Dr. Tahir.
Thank you very much for that great introduction, Rolando. I'm not sure if I really need to say anything after that, since it was so comprehensive, your introduction. So I'm just going to share a few slides with you to go a little more into the background of the historical perspective, because many of us can lose sight of where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. So it is good to have a vision of the history and the destiny of women in this new world order that we are all participating in building, and perhaps some concepts about the way forward. So from a historical perspective, if you think about the generally about the role of women and the status of women, we have pre-19th century, which was predominantly that of suppression, subordination, abuse, ignorance, lack of opportunity on a large scale, in global scale. Of course, we had societies in which that was the exception for periods of time, when women did have equal rights to a certain extent, and they were not undergoing all of these relatively negative things. But for the predominant part, our history of women, when you look at it, it is pre-19th century and then post-19th century, when you look at the literature and the evidence. And then changes came in the 19th and 20th century. And as in the quote that was read by Rolando, even very dominant and powerful scientists and sociologists, such as illustrated here with Charles Darwin, absolutely believed that women were, by their very natures, by their very physiology, by their biology, inferior to men in all aspects, including in intelligence, in thought, reason, imagination, or even the use of hands and senses. And there was plenty of evidence about that. But of course, as we know, again, Rolando quoted that, there were some major exceptions to the rule ladies who achieved great, great successes and pushed history forward, in fact, in many significant ways, such as Esther, Mary Magdalene, Zenobia, Fatima, Khadija, Joan of Arc, Catherine the Great, Queen Victoria, and several others who adorned the world of humanity with their great achievements. And indeed, there is a very interesting statement in the Baha'i writings that if you look at history carefully, every great event, success, every good event and great event that happened in history had some great woman behind it and energizing it and pushing it forward, but they were not recognized as such. So why this inferiority? And as Rolando again quoted nicely, it is because women were lacking the opportunity and privilege and right of education. And so she remained in her undeveloped state, and naturally she could not and did not advance. And that is because the world in the past has been ruled by physical force, and man has dominated over woman by reason of his more forceful and aggressive qualities, both of body and mind. So it is not any cause, any underlying cause of biological inferiority. But then we have the post-19th century, where there has been a remarkable awakening with the women's suffrage movement, with various movements such as feminism, some aspects of which were really militant in a sense, the advent of women's studies in university, women's educational institutions were established. And so if you think about it, and several other endeavors that are, of course, continuing. I just attended a few months ago in November, a leadership course offered by Harvard Medical School about women's leadership in healthcare, which is very interesting and it's very new. These concepts are new. Women are new to all these areas of endeavor. And this has never happened before. So really women's history is actually only 1 century. So it is important to recognize that and realize that in our expectations, in our actions, in our thoughts, and in the way that we plan things going forward. This is a picture of Emmeline Pankhurst, who was one of the prominent leaders of the suffrage movement. And I would recommend you to watch the film Suffragette, which came out a few years ago, 3-4 years ago. It is a very interesting film. And so the concept of equality as it's in the Baha'i faith follows this beautiful metaphor that the world of humanity has 2 wings. It is like a bird. One is woman, the other men. Not until both wings are equally developed can the bird fly. And should one wing remain weak, flight is impossible. So the Baha'i concept is not that of domination of women over men or the other way around, but that of achieving equality and complementarity as the wings of the bird, which means that the world has to become more imbued with feminine qualities. It has been up until now more imbued with masculine qualities, which are good, which have their place. But then the feminine qualities have been lacking, and the 2 need to develop equally. And there are several factors which we don't have time to discuss here. And part of this has been an evolutionary process of humanity, which has gone through infancy, childhood, now going through its adolescent and turbulent adolescent period when it's trying to find its identity. And then, of course, there is the long-awaited adulthood and coming of age, of maturity, of appearance of wisdom in humanity, to which we are all looking forward eagerly. And that will coincide with the appearance of world unity as the acme, as the culmination of our social evolution, which goes along with our psychological and spiritual evolution. So this is a birth of a new era of opportunity for all. If you know, this is a lesson in embryology, this is a conceptus, the very birth, a conception of a new opportunity, growing gradually into a fetus. And as you see this lady standing with the umbrella at the shore of a great ocean, but something is happening. There is a new baby that is in the making, a new reality, a new life is coming into being. And of course, that is the birth of a new way of thinking, a new paradigm, and a new life for half of the population of the world. But remember that this newly born babe is traversing in one night the path that needeth 100 years to tread. So we should be patient with ourselves, we should be patient with our men, we should be patient with the world, because this is going to take some time. You cannot expect this babe, of course it is treading in 1 century, the path that it should have done for a very long time, but this is a new era in this global situation. And then for some final words, the role of women, the greatest role of women will be in the establishment of peace, because we continue to make the wrong stuff and spending the biggest amount of resources, of human resources, for making war and destruction of each other. And always who is left is the poor mother, daughter, wife, sister, who is mourning the loss of the male members in war. And so the women have the greatest part in ensuring the establishment of world peace, which is the single most important question in the whole world, after which all the other questions will be answered and solutions will be found if unity and peace are established in the world. So in the short term, women have to become the opponents of war. They have to work tirelessly for political unification and to create this little piece of at least political unity. and armistice and the end to war. And in the longer term, of course, they have to continue to work as more effective educators of peaceful human beings to bring about a true spiritual unity between the hearts of between the hearts of the peoples of the world, which will lead to the most great peace, which is that of the establishment of true unity and peace. And women are absolutely central to it, such that the greatest factor in establishing universal peace and international arbitration is women. And this is a matter which vitally affects women. And when they form a conscious and overwhelming mass of public opinion against war, then there can be no war. And that they have to give moral support to every movement that works for peace. And only as women are welcomed into full partnership in all fields of human endeavor will the moral and psychological climate be created in which international peace can emerge. And so I just wanted to give you a few examples of the women that have been working in all fields over the last century and a little bit, that are giving us hope, that are creating for us models that we can pursue, young and old. So here is Malala. This is Shirin Ebadi, the Nobel Peace Laureate and human rights activist who works tirelessly and underwent so much persecution. And Malala, who was shot when she stood up for the education of girls and women. We have Greta Thunberg, who is the young climate activist who created an irrepressible movement. We have wonderful Black women who are entering into the arena of law and politics. And now we are so glad that we have only about 13 out of 993, so 7% of our world leaders are women, and they are trying, you can see that they are trying to do things differently. They are trying to be more collaborative and cooperative and more peaceful in their ways. And if not, that is certainly the direction that they should be going, rather than emulating what's gone on in the past. And so the way forward, of course, is that of the education of girls, that should be given priority, that they should be educated in their role as mothers, as the first educators of humanity, and they should be taught to rise up to meet and overcome challenges. And remember that true peace and tranquility will only be realized when every soul will have become the well-wisher of all mankind. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I look forward to the contributions of the next panelists and to the discussion following. And happy 2021 International Women's Day. Hooray for all the women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sepide, for that wonderful presentation and food for thought. Abira, could you kindly share with us your thoughts?
I'm all ready. Well, Rolando, that introduction was amazing, and the speech was amazing. I really learned a lot of new statistics about Women's International Day through this. I'm really happy to be here. So I want to thank you all, especially the Baha'i community, to invite me here. I just met Rolando like 2 days ago, and I said that am I the only odd one out? Like, am I the only Muslim in this thing? And they just welcomed me with open arms, and I really, really appreciate that. Basically, I want to talk about today about the misconceptions a lot of people might have when they look at me with my identity. So obviously, I'm clearly Asian, and I wear this head covering, which brings a lot of stories for a lot of people. So I'm just gonna quickly share my screen here so that everyone can actually see what we're talking about. Okay. Okay, so basically, I want to talk about gender equality in Islam. And as Rolando mentioned, I am currently teaching here at London International Academy. And I love to be here because London International Academy is not only a prestigious school, it is an IB World School. And for the past 2 decades, I have been an educator, and I've traveled around the globe extensively, exclusively educating people. I worked in international environments and I've encountered so many international perspectives. Pre-era to 9/11, I had no problems in mentioning my Muslim identity around the world, but things changed after 9/11. And I lived with those changes, and I want to clarify on how to deal with those changes. A lot of people misunderstand the concept of women's rights in Islam. And being an IB World School educator, the philosophy of IB is that we work under the umbrella of being international minded and being open minded. It is very important for all of us, male or female, to be international minded or open minded, because IB creates future leaders through that educational system. And it is because of that philosophy I stuck with IB for the past 2 decades, and I have not taught in any other school which is not an IB World School. So as far as my Muslim identity is concerned, I want to give you a little bit of a glimpse of how life was before pre-Islam. Women were mistreated. Women did not have any rights in marriage, divorce, education, careers, nothing. And not only that, the saddest part was that when a daughter was born, they would bury her alive because that was considered as a sad news. Me being a proud mother of 2 daughters, I can't even begin to think how much trauma that would have been for the woman back then. Islam came 1400 years ago, and Islam liberated women. Islam was one of the first religions which actually came in and liberated women and gave them their equal rights in every field of life. In the Quran, which is the holy book for the Muslims, Allah says, and when I say Allah, I'm referring to God, God says, I never fail to reward any worker among you for any work you do. Be you male or female, you are equal to one another. And I repeat, you are equal to one another. It is clearly said in the Quran, and that is how I grew up within a Muslim family, thinking that I am equal to my brother. I have the rights to do whatever I want to do, and my father will not stop me from pursuing my dreams because I am a daughter or I am a female or I'm going to become a woman. Not only that, in another words, God says, O people, we created you from the same male and female, and rendered you distinct peoples and tribes, that you may recognize one another. The best among you in the sight of God is the most righteous. So when we're talking about hierarchy between any people, it is not because of their sex. It is not because of their male or female orientation. It is because of being righteous. The more righteous you are, the more hierarchy you are in the eyes of God. In other words, God says in the Quran that we have created you in pairs, which means, and how do I interpret that as a Muslim, as a female, as a woman, that God created men and women side by side. We cannot live without each other. We can play different roles. We can be supportive of each other rather than going into this whole hierarchy that I'm physically more powerful than you or I'm emotionally more powerful than you. If we actually believe that we work hand in hand together, then this world will be such a better place. Our prophet, peace be upon him, Prophet Muhammad, says that heaven lies beneath the feet of a mother. Not a father, but a mother. And that does not mean that fathers are not important. They are, but they don't go through the childbirth pain. They don't carry the baby for 9 months. They don't go through all that. However, a woman cannot raise a child without the support of the father. We have different roles to play. And if we understand our roles and responsibilities based on our sex, we can succeed. And I love the slides which were shared earlier about the women empowerment and the number of women who are in controlling figures. Back when I was, and all of this is like just to give you an idea of how I feel as a Muslim and what my identity reveals, because whenever anybody tells me because of my hijab that I am suppressed, it really wants me to feel the urge to educate that that's not what it is. So I'm talking about back right after 9/11 as an educator. I was traveling around the world as usual and going to different educational conferences, giving talks on art. I was invited to a conference in Europe, European Council of International Schools, to speak on psychology of art, and I was very excited. This was a conference where I was supposed to address 3,000 people. And then I was traveling with my colleagues, and most of my colleagues were white. They were either Americans or they were Canadians or British. When we went to the customs in Germany, the custom officer, he stopped me because he looked at my passport. It was a Pakistani passport. I was coming in from Saudi Arabia, and then I'm wearing a hijab. The perfect recipe which defines me as a terrorist in his lack of knowledge. And he humiliated me to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. And then one of my colleagues, I still remember, Brian Carrion, he was a huge, tall, Mexican-American, hot-blooded guy. And he came in and he said, "Hey, bro, she's my sister. You have a problem with her?" And I still remember that sentence because when he came and spoke to the custom officer, he was like, okay, he's vouching for me. He's like, "Okay, ma'am, you can go." But at that point in time, I realized that this is not the type of a world I want my daughters to grow. I am a woman. I'm proud to be a woman. I'm proud to be an educator. But the world, the media has perceived me as nothing but a terrorist. They don't portray me as a mother. They do not portray me as a daughter. They do not portray me as a woman who can have dreams. And I did not want my daughters to go through that humiliation with a Pakistani passport, living in Saudi Arabia, traveling around the world and being discriminated. Therefore, me and my husband, we were talking and we came across this article. We were looking at our options and we found Canada as a multicultural society. And what I loved about Canada at that point, I mean, this was like 7 years ago, and when I read the law, it clearly says that every individual is equal before and under the law. Every individual, without discrimination, based on race, national, ethnic color, religion, or sex. In Canada, this was like the perfect thing which really hit me, and I started gathering up my papers. I went through immigration processes, and here I am today, luckily teaching in London International Academy, and I cannot thank God enough for allowing me to be in a place where I can raise my daughters who also wear a hijab and not being discriminated because of my skin color or my roots or my ethnic background, and just to be equal. Women around the world have survived with all of these discriminations because we might not be physically that powerful as men, but emotionally we are, and that's the whole point. Now, as an artist, taking a little bit of glimpse into the past, there are many females in the Middle East, and I was growing up in the Middle East. I've lived around the world, but majority of my childhood was spent in Saudi Arabia. And education systems did not even recognize art as a subject because it was considered un-Islamic, which is, again, their lack of knowledge, and it has nothing to do with being un-Islamic. But times have changed from that to now. Now, not only countries like Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, where women were not even allowed to drive, were not even allowed to have the rights for their marriage or choose their spouses, and they put it all on religion. And I want you, as educated people, to know that that has nothing to do with being a Muslim or religion. It was only cultural, and it was the laws which were shown to the world as Islamic laws, which has nothing to do with Islam, because Islam is one of those religions which clearly gives equal rights to women. Back then, art was not, I mean, I wanted to do art and people were like, that's not a subject you want to get into. But that was my vehicle and my passion to use as expressing myself. Until to date, I do. And I am proud to say that in the past 2 decades, I've had hundreds of students who are now pursuing art, and females, not only males, but females. So in the Middle East, I just want to give you a little bit of a picture that things have changed with the roles of women. Yes, they could have been suppressed in the past, but now the governments are recognizing how women can contribute. This is Her Excellency Sheikha Al-Taniji. She is an Emirati woman, a friend I for the past 5 years when I was teaching in Dubai. This woman is a woman of substance, and she inspired me because being, irrespective of being an Emirati, being an Arab, being in the Middle East, in 1995, her father gave her the permission to pursue her dreams, travel all the way alone to the United States and get her doctorate degree from the state of Colorado. Now, at that point, when she could do that, how much of a benefit of this woman is going to bring to the world. She's a mother of 5 children, and this is her daughter, Radha Al-Mazrui. She's one of my great students, and today this girl travels around the world pursuing her dream as a Muslim artist and representing her art as a way of expression. She has been very successful, and nothing is there to stop her with a mother like hers and the government supporting. It is because of her that I learned that the laws of UAE have completely changed. And in the Middle East, in the federal government or the governmental positions, 50% are females and 50% are males. That is a big change. A big change, because a country where women were just supposed to be sitting at home and raising children and having no other roles now allows them to work side by side, hand in hand with male genders. And with that, I would conclude that sometimes we just need to educate ourselves and not just totally go on with the media, because the media destroys a lot of repetition. At the same time, media can be used to promote equality between women. And I'm proud to be a mother, I'm proud to be a daughter, I'm proud to be a wife, I'm proud to be a sister. All the roles which I have been given by God, I'm proud to submit all of those. Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to talk today.
Thank you so much, Abira, for sharing your passion for art and dispelling the widespread misconceptions that are quite persistent today. I'm going to ask Catherine to unmute and to share with us some of her reflections.
I'm so humbled to be with these 2 knowledgeable panelists who've done so much, and who, you know, it's apt that you spoke before me, because you're using your knowledge and your talents to influence so many others in so many countries. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Although Sepide, probably you gave the big brushstroke of it, which is good. I don't know, maybe I'll add a little bit to that. And thank you, Abira, for what you said about Islam and teachings about women, because I took a class many years ago about Muhammad, and I had learned that. And this is the first presentation that I've heard so fully explain it. So thank you very much. Partly because I have Pakistani nephews and nieces. That's part of why I wanted to say. They're very dear to me. And their father has been instrumental in making sure his sisters and his girl children, as well as the boy children, are all highly educated and influencing their communities in very positive ways. So thank you. And welcome to London.
Thank you.
I'm relatively new here too, 10 years. So I want to talk about the influence of women of educated girls and women. Many face great obstacles, which thank you for Rolando for describing those. So that because in 10 minutes I won't have time to get into it. Yet when the impulse to learn is joined with an impulse to care, it becomes so powerful. And I can't help wondering what the world is going to keep evolving to as women become fuller and more equal participants in all our societies. Today, still 132 million girls do not attend school worldwide, 15 million of whom will likely never enter a classroom. And yet, really, the single biggest achievement of women in education in the last 200 years has to be that women and girls are getting educated on an unprecedented level worldwide. and that men are increasingly seeing the value and benefits of educating girls. In 1820, only 12% of the people of the world could read or write. Today, the numbers are reversed. Only 14% of the world can't read or write. And as Sepide said, the 19th century was a period of awakening. It set us off on a collective spiritual journey that shook the foundations of the status quo as we moved towards a global civilization. And it was during that time that the ideas of the equality of men and women and universal education emerged out of obscurity and stuck. The rise in number of educated girls and women, as Rolando explained, doesn't show us many of the challenges they face that are particular to their gender. And how much greater those challenges are, depending on a girl's caste, color, class, culture, or religion, as Abira spoke about. While women are finding their way closer to the proverbial table, some even finding a seat at the table, none have had a role in setting the table. And many girls and women are still not being allowed in the room. We don't know yet what the table will look like when women and men set the table together as equals, but the momentum towards education and equality continues and builds. Interestingly, universities that only opened up in the latter half of the 20th century to women fully opened up. I can remember all male colleges, quite a few of them. And I'm older, but not that old. And yet more women are attending university today than men, and not just in North America, around the world. You can't talk about women in education without talking about mothers. The mother-child relationship is a central part of human life. And it has so much to teach us about who we are, what we can be morally, spiritually, intellectually, practically, not only as women, but as men and boys and as a society. And it feels like a topic of its own, and given the short time, I don't want to give it short shrift, because otherwise it kind of lends itself to pigeonholing women and deflecting us from what I think are more meaningful conversations about the integration of mothers and children's needs into the patterns of a wider society. I often wonder what would our communities look like if women and children were put at the center, and rather than fitting into the economic and business needs, there was more of a shared integration. And what do we deprive ourselves when we don't listen to women's needs, and when we don't listen to women of color and indigenous women and women who live in poverty? What can we learn from them that will change our communities? An educated mother means many good things for children, for her family, and for her community, and for the progress of humanity. But we've seen during COVID that education alone is not enough, and that our social systems and workspaces aren't adequate to support family life or the equal role women need to play in society. And our children and mothers are currently suffering and being stretched beyond belief. There's a country in the world that has called itself the first feminist country in the world. This means that gender equality is central to its government's priorities in decision-making and resource allocation. The government looks at three things: rights, meaning the promotion of women's issues, including countering gender-based violence and discrimination; representation, including support for women's participation at all levels of decision-making; and resources, to ensure the equitable allocation among people of all genders, whether in government budgets or development budgets. Interestingly, to become the first feminist government in the world was partly a strategic move, as studies done by the military and other organizations have shown that there are strong links between the inclusion of women and stability, peace, and economic growth. I think in interest of time, I want to share a decidedly unique example of how one woman seized a historical opportunity. It was definitely right place, right time, but she made a choice to make a profound and long-lasting difference in all our lives. Eleanor Roosevelt was the driving force behind arguably the most influential document since the 19th century, other than sacred scriptures. Roosevelt was a diplomat, author, activist, and is best known as widow of the United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And in the wake of World War II, she persisted doggedly to bring diverse people, mostly men, together to create a document that was not a treaty or law, but a moral yardstick by which people all over the world could measure their own communities and conditions. The process was far from easy. Imagine gathering a group of people who don't know each other, who represent different political interests or from different cultures and countries, and asking them to agree on a statement about basic human values and to describe what everyone in the world needs to do to ensure that those values are upheld. That's quite a challenge. It's hard to do in a family. It's hard to do in a school. I've tried to get parents organized. I can't even imagine what she had to go through. Eleanor Roosevelt could have retreated into a comfortable life of privilege, yes, but instead she worked relentlessly to guide the team drafting the document through committee and then through the process of ratification by the newly formed United Nations. This document, which you probably guessed by now, is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It's an unusual international document, an aspirational statement, not written by one person, but by many from different cultures. Nothing like it existed before. It is a foundational text in the history of human and civil rights. It details an individual's basic rights and fundamental freedoms and affirms their universal character as inherent, inalienable, and applicable to all human beings, women and men, girls and boys alike. The Declaration is considered a milestone document for its universal language, which makes no reference to a particular culture or political system or country or religion, but to all of us. It directly inspired the development of international human rights law and was the first step in the formulation of the International Bill of Human Rights. It has spawned organizations, institutions, nonprofits, schools, agencies, a world court, et cetera, that take the document's ideals and apply them to local, national, and international needs and challenges. It's kind of hard to overstate how this has influenced our thinking, our language, and our actions, whether we know it or not, and continues to. One significant example of global cooperation relevant to International Women's Day was the Beijing Women's Conference in 1995. I don't know if any of you were there. It galvanized women working worldwide for women's rights. The Beijing Platform for Action was a turning point in the world's understanding of women's and girls' rights and ushered in a new mindset that realizing the full potential of women and girls is a powerful and essential component of successful and sustainable development. Since 1995, that understanding has been translated into many local level efforts, and the platform itself for action has served as a blueprint for advancing gender equity around the world. Girls and women all around the world in small and big ways are adding to the momentum towards this global consciousness, towards the sense of the equality of men and women. Some of their efforts become public, and some, like Eleanor Roosevelt's, and some remain private, but are still influential. And I think of the example that I know is in the video, but also is in my husband's family, of a great-grandmother or a grandmother whose feet were bound. She's Chinese. She was hardly able to walk. It was so painful. And she refused to bind her daughter's feet. A small thing. No one will know about it. It won't make it to the papers or the media. But by that small decision, she changed her daughter's future and that of future generations by rejecting old patterns of doing things and helping emancipate the women in her family line, and then thereby bringing benefits to every family member. I'm sure you have stories in your own families and in your own experiences. There are so many examples of girls and women whose personal responses to suffering and iniquities have raised our consciousness and helped communities along the way. Some of them have been mentioned. I'll share a couple more. Kenyan social, environmental, and political activist and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, Wangari Maathai. She founded the Greenbelt movement that focuses on planting of trees, environmental conservation, and women's rights. Her goal when she began was to help improve the lives of rural women, and thereby men, by improving the environment on which they depend for water, food, fuel, medicine, by planting trees. The unexpected impact of her work was to show the world that the solutions to our many societal and planetary ills often rest with those who bear the greatest burden. Malala Yousafzai, who Sepide mentioned, turned a horrific experience into a global platform for promoting girls' education and equality. 9 months after she was shot in the head on her way to school, she was giving a speech at the UN on her 16th birthday and urging world leaders to change their policies and support women's education and rights. Autumn Pelletier here in Canada lived in a community with no clean water to drink and is now an international advocate for water rights and protecting water in Indigenous communities worldwide. Her mother and aunt taught her as a child about the importance of clean water and the environment, taught her that water is life. And now, I mean, she's, I think, 15 now, and she goes around internationally speaking. She spoke at the UN. She is now Anishinaabe Nation Chief Water Commissioner, or water walker of her people, following in her great aunt's footsteps. So you see this influence that comes through the families, through the communities. The question of the equality of men and women is not simply a matter of righting social and historical injustices towards girls and women, but it's about making things better for all of us. It's a key factor in wide-ranging societal changes that will give rise to a new civilization, a global civilization, prosperous in both its material means and dimensions and its spiritual dimensions. To close, I'd like to read a quote that Sepide, I think you put part of it, but I'll read the whole thing. The world of humanity is possessed of two wings, the male and the female. And so long as these two wings are not equivalent in strength, the bird will not fly. Until womankind reaches the same degree as man, until she enjoys the same arena of activity, extraordinary attainment for humanity will not be realized. Humanity cannot wing its way to heights of real attainment. When the two wings or parts become equivalent in strength, enjoying the same prerogatives, the flight of man will be exceedingly lofty and extraordinary. Therefore, women must receive the same education as man, and all inequality be adjusted. Thus, imbued with the same virtues as man, rising through all the degrees of human attainment, women will become the peers of men. And until this equality is established, true progress and attainment for the human race will not be facilitated. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much to all our, very experienced, esteemed speakers today. You've given me a lot of food for thought. I imagine I can speak for the rest of the attendees that they would say the same. I was, trying my best to keep as much notes as I could so that I could facilitate a meaningful discussion afterwards. And so maybe, there are lots of threads, ideas that each of you shared, but maybe I'll start with a general one for all of you, and maybe I can come around to individual questions that I had as each of you presented and piqued my interest. One thing that becomes very apparent from listening to you is the fundamental need So, experientially, women increasingly, or, taking leadership positions, not only visually, but, and you mentioned that, but grassroots movements, environmental movements, movements for the education, increasing education of women and girls. Malala Yousafzai, I think, Catherine, you mentioned this initiative in Kenya. I can think of Berta Cáceres in Central America, the Honduran indigenous activist who was killed for defending the environment. So women are at the forefront in these most vulnerable movements, and yet we still hear, that these criticisms, against the women's movement, or the idea that somehow women are coming to get men. Why is it that you think, what are your thoughts? Why is it that men and our societies are so hesitant, suspicious, of women, when it's clear from your presentation that women's involvement in the respective fields is of benefit to the whole of humanity? So I'll leave that, I don't know, maybe we can start with Abira, just to get us started on that question.
Well, basically, the thing is, it's just perceptions, Ronaldo. Everything is just based on the perceptions on how a boy has been raised, how a man has been raised, and how he looks at his mother, his wife, and his sister, the women, gender in the family. I personally think that, as I mentioned earlier, that because we cannot go alone in this world, we just need to support each other for whatever decisions. At the same time, like, the woman is the one, as Sepide said, like, she's the one who bears a child, brings the child into the world. But when the child comes into the world, he needs to hold both hands, the mother and the father, and only then they can go on forward in the betterment of this world. So it's just like, when everyone changes their perception that we are not superior and we can just go hand in hand together, that would just resolve a lot of issues, and we will be on the road to success, as the world leaders are doing right now. However, there are still places where this ideology has not reached, still man-dominating society, and we need to get there and do the best we can to change that perspective.
Thank you very much. Sepide, do you have thoughts on this?
No, I think Abira said it beautifully. It's all about the fact that that we have to change our traditional way of thinking about things. And change is always difficult for us human beings, because we get into certain habits, into certain traditions, as Abira said, into certain cultural practices that are passed down to us as gospel and unquestionable. And so these attitudes, these habits, these thoughts get passed down to us, and we display them without thinking about it. We do it partly unconsciously, or at least subconsciously. And so to change these thoughts, habits, attitudes that are reared within us from a very young age, that are propagated by the media, by the society, by our leaders, etc., it is very difficult to take a step back to critically think about every concept that is presented to us as truth and as indisputable fact, and then to try and think for ourselves with new eyes, with new ears, with new patterns in a very scientific and unbiased way, and then to change our position. That is surely the hardest challenge for human beings, is to change their mind and create a new mind about some things, some concepts that have been ingrained into us for generations and passed down to us as truth, or things that are presented to us as fashionable, that, oh, this is okay to be this way. It is okay. It is fine. It is normal, and it is widely accepted. But then again, to step back, use critical thinking methods, think for ourselves, and decide whether something makes sense or doesn't make sense, and whether something is commensurate also with the will of God for this age, or whether it's the will of man over others. So you need both the scientific as well as the spiritual lens to change, and that takes time.
this point, I'm gonna, Catherine, I'm just this point that you said, distinguish between the will of God and the will of man, I think is so. I think man has often confused the will of God with his own will, and I think that's something that has been touched upon already. Catherine.
I'm going to be a little more specific, but jumping off what Abira said about raising boys. I have a boy and a girl, and I felt like God gave me one of both so that I couldn't take sides. Johan and I have a boy that was born with a lovely temperament. He was, as a child, a baby and a child, very easy, and an adult, very easy to raise. I mean, as an older child. However, I found it harder raising him because of all the messaging that surrounds what a boy is, what a man is. My daughter was a firstborn, but when my son was born, where we were living on an island, people were like, "Finally, you got a boy, yeah!" And then this little baby, who is no different from my female baby, they're like high-fiving this baby instead of being gentle with the baby. And then, you take this baby to watch his sister at a dance class, and he's curious because he's a child and because he's a human and he wants to see. And the other moms with baby boys said, "No, that's not for you." So before they could even walk. And so it's, as a mother, and this is why I don't like giving short shrift to speaking about motherhood, but a lot of all of these things that we talk about in the abstract become true in that relationship and in that moment. And talking about like the role of fathers in that relationship is also a conversation we need to have. What does that look like? And in fairness to men, they haven't been raised to know. My father, his mother was widowed when he was young. He was the oldest of 3 boys. There was a war going on. He was he provided for us. He was very good that way, but he didn't know what it meant to be a father. So I'm very sympathetic to that. But we have to talk about this. And I think that's what we see in adult life is what starts right at the beginning. Is the mother supported in how she raises her children? Is the mother educated so that she can support her? She can process all the information. I actually, what's the word? Curated my children's social life when they were little. I mean, it sounds horrible, but I didn't want my son picking up the kind of entitlement that I heard in other little boys. I just didn't want him to speak that way. And I knew that I couldn't tell him to do different. I had to have him be around people who were different. So I think what you both are much more eloquent, but that moment is really important in what men become. And then once you're a grown man, then having conversations with your spouse, with others about how to support that relationship.
Thank you very much. So another theme that I heard come from the discussion, your presentations, was the idea of patience. Sepide mentioned the idea of patience in the unfoldment, the advancement of women, and getting to a place where humanity can really reach its full expression. I heard Catherine mentioned the idea of this woman. I don't know if I can't recall it was a video, who decided for her child. Her feet were bound, and then her child, she made a decision, an individual decision. And Abira obviously illustrated the idea of having to endure at immigration, the humiliation of an immigration officer, requiring great patience. So I feel like at once there's a bit of a tension. I think oftentimes we hear of the movement, the importance for making the change. How long do we have to wait? Like it's been a century. It's been so long. Sepide, you've talked to us pre-post-19th century. Can you elaborate, Sepide, on this idea of patience and Why do we need patience? Why can't we have it now? What?
I think because we as human beings tend to be very impatient, right? We want everything like yesterday. And so that's not how things change. Change can sometimes be dramatic and fast, like we have growth spurts in the growth of an individual or in the growth of even an embryo, an organism. We have the baby growing very quickly within the first 6 months, year of life. And then with mid-childhood, it slows right down, right? And then at adolescence, you get another massive growth spurt. And then before you become an adult. So there are different stages and ages within the growth of an organism. And it's the same really with everything in terms of the evolution of humanity, in terms of our spiritual evolution, social evolution, in the evolution of our thought. We go through stages and phases. So even though men and women have always been equal and always will be equal in the sight of God, as Abira very clearly indicated, right? But in the past, because of the social lack of capacity of human beings, that equality was not established, not because it wasn't a founding principle of creation, but because human beings could not enact it. They were not able physically and mentally and psychologically to actually put that principle into practice on a regular basis and on an enduring basis. And so now the time has come when that principle can finally be established at the time, as we're at the threshold of our collective maturity. And we are now understanding, going beyond conflict and force and domination to a culture of cooperation and a culture where thought and your ideals, those are the highest aspirations of your ideals to establish peace and unity and strength and leadership as a servant, the concept of a servant leader and not that of a dominator of other human beings. And so I think that with every biological system, with every complex organic system, as like a complex adaptive system, change happens at a pace that has to be organic. Otherwise, it'll be cancerous. And organic means it's often slow, it's often painful. You get growing pains. You have some setbacks. A toddler will start walking, then it will fall on its feet. And then you don't say, oh, that's it, forget, or be militant and trying to, go forth full force and with lots of force try to establish and get the toddler to walk. No, it can't be. Things have to take time. And I think that is the challenge before us. We just work, nourish this babe, persistently, correctly, with perseverance, with steadfastness, we go forward, right? Using the correct means, using lawful means, etc., and to imbue society, such as at a forum like this, right, and beyond, to imbue society with the new attitudes, with the correct attitudes, and that takes time. And I know it's very difficult for me included. I'm the most impatient person by nature, but I think that's the only path that we have to take, because it has to be gradual, organic growth of a complex adaptive system, which stirrings at the grassroots, then eventually give changes to the whole system. But it doesn't happen immediately.
Thank you. I failed to mention that people are welcome to share their cameras so the speakers can see you all. It's not obligatory. It was just feel free to do that at this time. Did Abira or Catherine, did you want to address that question? I have others for you as well.
I think you can go on with the next question, because Seppi did a fantastic job in answering that question.
Okay, maybe I'll ask Abira. There is this persistent discourse in the West that religion is the source, is retrograde towards women, generally speaking. And I think you've highlighted, obviously, the focus on Islam and the perception that, Islam relegates women to a secondary place within society. But you've obviously made the case, to the contrary, not only, textual references for us to see with our own eyes. Why do you think that this idea persists, that religion is so antithetical to the women's movement, women's advancement?
The thing is, the problem is that growing up in Asia and in the Middle East, yes, women were not given the rights. And as growing up, I understood. I was lucky that I was raised by an educated father who was not prejudiced about the men and women. I have a brother, and we both were treated equally. Never did I ever feel that he was superior to me or better than me. But unfortunately, as Sepide said, and as Catherine said, that when her son was born, and finally you have a son. Like, I have two daughters, and my Arab friends would be like, you need to have a son. I'm like, why do I need to have a son? Like, my daughters can do anything what a son would do. But it's just the pre-concept which people grow up with. As Catherine said, that, when a boy is born, you don't give him a doll, you'll give him a dinky or a car to play with. If we just, as a society, embed this whole idea that this is for men and this is for female and this is the role and that is not for female and that's not for men. We just need to change that whole concept. And this whole concept of, like, if a woman is covering her head, well, the nuns also cover their head. If Muslims cover their head, like, the funny thing is that, when I cover head, people in Europe have a big problem with that. But when you go to a church and you see the portrayal of Mary, she's always having her head covered. I have never seen her with a blow-dried hair. I mean, so I am following Mary more than a Christian's following Mary, and she's my hero. She is. I cannot be a Muslim if I don't believe that. So the pre-concept of everything, like, one other thing which I would just add to that is that as Muslims, we're not allowed to paint prophets, or it's not part of, we can't depict those as artists. But the people who are artists who design the churches or the temples and whatsoever, they are not Muslims, okay? And they paint Jesus with a thobe, with a beard. But when a Muslim guy does that, it's not acceptable. It's like you're being conservative or whatever, So just to have an open mind, and as one of the IB philosophy is to be a thinker, to be a listener. When the opposite person is talking, listen and then place your argument. First, let them understand that, yes, you're listening. So the media, they just throw out at you that this is how you should perceive a woman or the role of a woman in certain religions or in a society, which is not true. Use your own brain. God has given you a brain, use it. That's how I would just define it.
Thank you. And sorry, I've been reminded by the tech people in the background who are always lifesavers that this meeting is being recorded. And so if you unblock your camera, your image will be recorded. So, you engage at your discretion. So I believe that we have allowed for, comments or questions to be included in the chat, and I will monitor those as they come in and field them to the participants, the presenters. I wanted to see if I could ask Catherine a question because there's a lot of food for thought there. I think one of the things, a couple of things, you use a lot of metaphors, the idea of setting the table, of being at the table, and what if women have not been involved in creating the table, or actually, coupling the impulse to learn with the impulse to care. This is something that I think Sepide mentioned as well, touched on briefly in her previous answer. One thing that provoked a bit of thought in me is the idea, what if women and children were placed at the center of societal decision making? And I wanted to ask you, what is it about, what are the impetus within our current socioeconomic political system that places, women, children at the bottom of decision making? Or what are some of the things that you've seen through your experiences that kind of flip that around, that can provide us some insight into another way of doing things?
That's a big question. I grew up off and on in Washington, D.C. My father's a diplomat, for those of you who don't know. And I have friends who are in the international agencies and everything. And I've asked over the years, so when you go to these conferences, these big world venues, do you talk about motherhood? Absolute silence. And again, it's not about, and I'm careful with it because I know that it's not about putting, mother's places in the home. It's not that. It's not about going backwards. It's about the fact that there is so much to learn in that relationship. There is so much to learn about raising a human being, how they come into the world, that can inform more of our lives. And so when I say putting them at the center, we all live most of us live in societies that were developed by men. And again, fairly, it's not all bad. There are good things about it. It works. We feed ourselves, but they're around the constructs of being a man. What would it be like if they were around the constructs of what women perceive? Like schooling. It's quite competitive. It's all grade driven. I had my kids in what's called alternative schools before we moved to Canada, without grades. It changes the vibe of how people learn. Maria Montessori, who was a woman scientist in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, created a model that doesn't use grades, or marks, I guess, in Canada. There are things that women come to or sense, because I'm sure one of you could explain it better than I could, but that they bring to the table is just different, where women have to rely, mothers have to rely on other people. The minute you have a child, you exist within the whole web of a community. You have to, find a school for your child. You have to live in relationship to all these people with the person, the being who is most precious to you and who you're responsible before God for raising. So you become aware of things. You don't see things in terms of competition. You see things in terms of cooperation. How can we benefit the life of this newborn and this child and this youth? And then how can we, and then that conversation is going to inevitably benefit everyone, because if you need safety for children, it will become safe. You will have a community that's safe for everyone. If, I don't know, if you have children who are raised with a sense of cooperation and a sense of service, you will have a society that focuses less on how much material gains you make than on how much help you can give others and support others. So, I mean, I'm not answering your question because it's a big question, and but I think there's just contributions that women's experiences, particularly mothers, can bring that would change the paradigm. But it's a different kind of conversation. I'll give an example. My first job, bigger job was at a publishing house, and we were sitting at a huge editorial table choosing books. Well, as a woman, I was listening to people, and I expected them to listen to me. Well, the people whose books got through were those who spoke fastest and loudest, and who not necessarily listen to others. That was not a female created dynamic. Just saying, although women learn and then they imitate that behavior. So.
Thank you very much. No, and some of these questions naturally, imply a lot of, like you said, we could talk about motherhood, a whole series, a whole university course, the rest of our lives, and we wouldn't exhaust the manifold ways in which this concept impacts our daily lives. So as I mentioned at the outset, we were going to have two halves of today's session, but I didn't the conversations were so fruitful, the presentations were so thought-provoking that I didn't want to, precipitate, moving to the film without, having an opportunity to engage with the speakers a little bit more. At this stage, given that we have 10 minutes left and it's a 41-minute film, I've been, yeah, so what we can do is we can share the link of the video in the chat so that you can go away and have an opportunity to view that film on your own. And obviously within the confines of your home or your, your tablet or whatever device you have, you can really appreciate that video. I have a question. What are specific suggestions of how men can be better allies of women? And this is from Johan. I just wanted to attribute it. So how do men become better allies of women? Maybe Abira, we can ask you.
Well, as I said, like if men can be, all they have to do is just be supportive. And I'm lucky to have a father and a husband and a brother who has been very supportive, but not women have that opportunity in their life. So if the only thing a man can do is just be, as Catherine said, be a good listener. Women tend to talk a lot, and men tend to just block their ears, and then they just want to hear the part they want to hear. I mean, you don't really want to see or talk to or listen to your wife when she's angry. It's a common, there are many husband and wife type of jokes or whatever. But the thing is that all men have to do is just be good listeners and show the empathy that they hear and they understand. And that's all what a woman wants to hear. She doesn't want a man to make a change or anything, because maybe it's not in his capacity, maybe it is. But the thing is, if only men just change one thing, that yes, I'm listening and I'm there for you. That one sentence will change the whole world, because women would be more happier and we can succeed together.
Thank you very much, Abira. I don't know if our other presenters wanted to speak to that question.
I'm married to Johan, so I figure he'll hear my answer.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Abira said. It's about the support in action, to actually push the women forward, to enable them to move forward, to encourage them to move forward, to support them, to help them in whatever way they can, and not to be an obstacle to their progress. I think that's important, to get rid of some of those very traditional expectations that are around. For example, I have a lot of colleagues, female colleagues, young colleagues at work, and of course, as you know, like with every other area of medicine and any other area of life, it has been dominated by men traditionally. And now over the last 3-4 decades, 2-3 decades, that women are coming to actually come to be the majority in certain subspecialties, such as, for example, in my own subspecialty of pediatrics. And so I hear regularly from my female colleagues that the inflexibility of the working system, the difficulty, the burden of the hours of work, for example, the difficulty in having to figure out childcare, and the perception that if you're not in the office or in your particular hospital at one time, that you therefore must be a slacker, right? And therefore you're not working properly, not as hard as the other men, not being as productive. All of these kinds of perceptions of the way that even your hours of work are expected to be worked, right? They are patterned after, as Catherine said, after a man's system. So this lack of flexibility is something that simply has to change if it's going to be mother-child friendly, and to enable women as well as men to become productive, because we know that both benefit eventually, both men and women. The men will also benefit from the women's productivity and their input. And so it's very difficult. The inflexible system we have now is not conducive to that. And I hear a lot of complaints from my female colleagues. And of course, I don't complain, because if I complain, then nobody listens, right? So it's that kind of, those kinds of things are the ways that men can support women, in listening, in supporting, and in being, sponsoring women as well, and campaigning for change in the way that societies run, to make things more flexible, more family friendly.
Thank you. I have two more questions that I think we can, if the two of the presenters would like to address. Maybe Catherine can address this one. And Laurie, I see your hand up, and I want to make sure that I get to you. So Catherine, here's a question that was in the chat. Women's relationship with other women also plays a significant role in achieving the equality we hope to achieve. Genuine acceptance of women to other women from other race, ethnic, and religious background is crucial. What are your thoughts on this?
Kind of echoing what's been said about men. I can't speak for what other women need to do. What I do is to teach myself and to learn to listen, and to accompany my friends and family members. I think a quality that's not, it's a little tricky as a woman saying this, but a quality that's not considered, that we don't hold in high esteem, at least in the West, whatever that means, is humility. And many relationships would be improved with humility. Understand that, and so what I say is, I don't know everything. In fact, I know very little. And so listening is really what I would say. And also, I would answer this to the former question you had too, is doing a little homework yourself. I can't know, I have a lot of Black American friends in the States, and I can't know what it's like to be Black American. I just can't. We might be equal in the house. I love them, they love me. But when we walk outside, we're treated differently. The same would be if Ibero is in my house. We love each other, we enjoy each other's company. We walk outside, we're not going to be treated the same way. It's just, and I need to understand that. And I need to do the work to understand that. And I think, and I would suggest that for men, it's the same thing. When Sepide was speaking, I have a sister who's a physician in a hospital in the States, and even young men, young old men still forget to include her in decisions when she's at a senior level. They just ignore her. And that's today. That's not a long time ago. So I think that it's a two-sided thing. Teach yourself, inform yourself, listen to stories, read stories, be actively interested in what another person's experience is, and to listen to them as a friend.
I think we may have time just for this last question. Laurie, you had your hand up. I wondered if you wanted to ask your question.
Laurie Del Pino. I am an interfaith, interspiritual minister. Right now I'm living in the United States, which has been a real trip. I'm Canadian. I went to University of Toronto. I taught at Canadore College in North Bay, Ontario. So I have and I'm married to an African-American man. So you can imagine all the things that I handle and juggle. This past 4 years has been driven me out of my mind. Basically, I scream at the TV. I was screaming at the TV for 4 years. But anyway, I was brought up in a certain way. Being brought up in Canada is very different from being brought up anywhere else. I just wanted to let you know that. And one thing I wanted to say, first of all, I so appreciate the speakers, just incredible. And your moderator is doing an incredible job. I just want to say, with my teaching experience, I taught for 35 years. I taught at a college and a high school, that I tried to encourage all the girls to use their voices, to be very confident in using their voices. And what I loved, one thing I loved about being down here is that often when I was in a group of men, I would say, "Excuse me, I'm speaking right now." Exactly what Kamala Harris said. And I had no qualms about saying that. I was brought up, my father died just before I was born, so I was brought up by a very confident woman who brought up two girls, and she made sure that we spoke and that we were heard. And when I was teaching, I wanted to make sure that all the girls exercised their voices, because I'm a strong believer that each person is born for such a time as this. So I need to step back for the younger students that I taught and say, well, tell me about that idea. So to be really, really confident, I think is important. Excuse me, I'm speaking, and let the chips fall where they may. So I don't know how you feel about that, but that's my feeling. My first grandchild was born recently, and I was with her a lot at the beginning, and she wanted to build. She didn't want to do, girly things, I guess you would say. She wanted to build. So I made sure to buy her lots of blocks. And whenever I come over, all she wants to do is build. Her dad's an engineer, and he says, I think she's going to be an engineer. So he's encouraging her already. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you all so much. I'm very invigorated by the conversations. Thank you so much.
Did anybody want to address any of Laurie's comments there before we wrap up?
Laurie, I just want to say you said it so nicely that I'm talking. I want you to listen. That's the key to get your message across, that be a listener when I'm talking. And I'll be a listener when you're talking, but you said it so nicely. So thank you so much. It was very, very nicely said.
Completely agree. Thank you for that very, very valuable contribution and a good tip for us, Laurie.
Well, thank you so much again to the presenters for taking the time to put your thoughts together, give us some provoking ideas on this very important International Women's Day 2021. You've certainly given me a lot to think about, a lot of note taking, and I think we're all better for it on this Sunday morning. That really brings us to the conclusion of our program. We have included a link to the video in the chat. However, it has been encouraged by some within the group that you could continue on and watch the video collectively through Zoom. That may be something that you're interested in. For those of you who have other time commitments, and other appointments, you're welcome to go. But this would conclude the formal program for the day. And once again, thank you all for joining in on this very important occasion to contemplate, the objectives of International Women's Day, and hopefully you go away to our respective private lives and our communities, and continue the conversation about, some of the stimulating ideas that we've received today. Thank you very much on behalf of the Baha'i Community of London, and we hopefully have the opportunity to engage with you in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Rolando and Hoda.
Thank you, everybody.